Hello, welcome. My name is Anju Kasturiraj, and I am one of the Migration, Heritage, and Belonging Community Facilitators at the National Maritime Museum. And as you can see here, I am gathered with two incredible artists and community advocates, Linett Kamala and Hansika Jethnani, who are here to discuss hair and the rituals and the nuances and the cultural and familial perceptions around it, as well as a few objects from the museum, which contain human hair, as well as some of their own work. Linett and Hansika will also be telling us a bit more about their own work involving hair, as well as their personal and cultural connections to the issues at hand. And so, Linett is founding director of Linett Kamala Art, which is a socially engaged creative practice which aims to enrich lives through art and is deeply rooted in community empowerment. Linett is also president of the University of the Arts London Alumni of Colour Association and board director for the Notting Hill Carnival. I actually met her through a class she was teaching at UAL this past year. Linett works across various disciplines, including mixed media paintings, street art, DJ soundscapes, and virtual reality. Linett's work is recognized by her signature style, an expressive hand script, which she refers to as freestyle calligraphy. Freestyle calligraphy, yes, okay. And Hansika, who I actually met through another project I did through my position here at Royal Museums, which was for a Diwali project. Hansika is a poet and visual artist, and she's also the co-founder of Funky Maharani, an eclectic Indian jewelry brand seeking to reimagine tradition. So we're here today to talk about hair, what it means to us as South Asian women, as Black women. And I want to acknowledge that, again, the role that hair plays across cultures, especially for women, can be deeply emotional and spiritual. But it's not a homogenous experience, whether that be between Black women or between South Asian women, to say the very least. And we are here for the nuance. We are here for the discussion. We're here to challenge and deepen our understanding. So without further ado, Linett, can you tell us all a bit more about yourself and what you're specifically interested in exploring here today?
So my work tends to tell stories. I'm very much interested in uncovering historical personalities, events, but also linking that with current day. And I'm really interested in talking about these pieces and how they'll sort of connect with some of the work that I've been doing as well. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, and what are some of those assumptions that have been made and expectations as well around hair. So lots to say on the matter. It's a very rich topic.
Thank you. And Hansika, what about you? Can I ask what initially came up for you when I first DM'd you about this project?
I think the first thought I had was actually a very personal experience, and that very much connected with the more like cultural understanding of hair in South Asian culture, which is essentially when, like, I've always preferred having short hair and wanting to cut my hair short. And after I came out to my mom as queer and then wanted to cut my hair short, and I did it anyway because I don't live with her and like I'm an adult. But when I did it, like her reactions were very negative, and it's almost as if she associated my cutting of hair with my sexuality, and it just got me thinking a lot about these stereotypes that we have around hair and femininity. And kind of, it reminded me of a project that I did in 2014 when I was at CC. I was really excited by your DM because it kind of brought up a lot of different things for me. And I think even living here and like kind of experiencing the kind of the gender stereotypes on a daily basis, with a partner that has short hair. So a multitude of things, which I will talk more about as we kind of continue the conversation.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And thank you both for, again, you're bringing a lot of like personal and vulnerable as well as like wider cultural experiences to this. And it really is like an honor to be connecting with you both. We've been having discussions on this for a while now, and I'm excited for it to come to fruition in this way. So, the first thing we're going to do is look at some museum objects and then look at some work from both of you, kind of like intercut between each other. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce the first object, and we're just going to get into it. It is the hair wreath and frame, if you both have a reference image for that ready. And I just want to give a quick background for this object, and then I really want to hear, I guess, what your reactions to it are and like what comes up for you as artists on a more personal level in terms of culture. But just for our viewers, this hair wreath was made in 1807, and it contains the hair of Lady Emma Hamilton and her daughter, Horatia Nelson. A little backstory. Lady Emma Hamilton was an actress, but she was much better known as being the mistress of Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, who was the first Duke of Bronte, as well as a British flag officer, really well known for his work during the Napoleonic Wars. And Horatio Nelson is their illegitimate daughter. And so naturally, for the time, the relationship between Lady Emma Hamilton and Admiral Nelson was a massive scandal. And Lady Emma Hamilton never actually acknowledged that Horatia was her daughter. And Horatia never accepted the fact that Lady Emma Hamilton was her mother either. So when Horatia, the daughter, when she died in 1881, her gravestone said, adopted daughter of Vice Admiral Lord Nelson. Didn't say anything about her mother, didn't really embed that memory into stone. And later on, adopted was changed into beloved, presumably to add a bit more, familiarity to that. And so this is a wreath with, again, the hair of a mother and a daughter with this very contentious and very like scandalous history attached to them, along with like the sexism of the time, kind of, further conflating the idea of a mistress and all of the connotations of that. So with that in mind, my question for both of you is, does anything specific come up when you see this image of hair being preserved in this way?
Yeah, so my first reaction was a little bit, this is a bit odd, this is weird, seeing hair presented in this way and as a wreath, because, often wreaths may be associated with some type of mourning, perhaps, and I gather and looked back and done a bit of mini research, and this was particularly a trend, the collecting and gathering of hair for, as a keepsake during that time in England at that time. So it just made me think about, I couldn't help but think about connecting it to now and to present day for myself in terms of the taking of hair and doing that with hair. It seemed so almost alien to me that it would be turned into this sort of decorative form. And it also just made me start thinking historically as well about, people who may have looked like me back at that time and what was going on for their lives and for them with their hair, and so just a curiosity. I was curious. I just found it a bit odd, a bit weird, it jarred me slightly when I first saw it. Going on, and the fact that it's presented in a frame made me think about where would it be hung, what place would it be put in, would it be in the home, and where would it be positioned? So that was like my initial gut feeling when I first saw it.
So like very practical concerns about it that reveal a lot about how people were treated and like how hair was regarded at the time versus now.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the time period as well of these preservations are during colonialism. And, as Linett mentioned, she wonders how it was for her ancestors back then. And, it also speaks volumes that like the kind of hair that is preserved in the museums right now, whose hair those are. it really does bring up a lot of that history as well that we are not, again, thought about, and kind of like everything's just shoved underneath the carpet.
My reaction to this was very different, but also very similar in the sense that my family, I've grown up collecting hair. Like I'll have pieces of lover's hair or friend's hair. Like if before I leave a place that I consider home, I have like cut off a piece of my hair and given it to someone and vice versa. And it's a very special thing to me. I have some hair on my altar right now. And those sort of rituals, the informal and the formal ones, are kind of like what made me more interested in talking about this subject. But I also am aware there's a lot of different connotations around like respect and autonomy that come with having a person's hair in your possession and what that means. I also think about the way that, basically people of color were so pathologized for having different features at this time, that I'm sure that extends into the way that hair was regarded as well. Like I think especially about like skin lightening and the way that Black and brown bodies were pathologized and called dirty or called like barbaric as like a means of perpetuating colonialism and like Eurocentric beauty standards. So our third and fourth objects both contain hair from Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, who we were talking about earlier. There's actually a really great piece written by Royal Museums more about their family history and more about the controversy surrounding them and who they were as individuals on the Royal Museum's website, as well as a video from the curators. So if anyone's interested in learning a bit more about the context behind these objects on that level, I highly recommend you check it out. But for the sake of this conversation that we're having right now, we have, again, Lord Nelson's hair framed in a pendant, and then we have it in a wooden frame. I have some questions for both of you of what came up, but I want to give you a moment to, again, share your initial reactions.
Because the way that it's been preserved, it's very, very almost like gift-like. And is that associated to his status, essentially?
But also this thing about the collection of everything at that time, this whole thing around museums and gathering, and it's there, isn't it, for future generations? It's almost as if, and we will be discussing this in years to, for generations to come. It's described for us what who it belongs to, and it's that thing about, as we said before, who is important and yeah, and that thing about the actual the pendant. I can imagine, back then it's clearly it's kind of maybe not as dazzling now. It's maybe, the stones have dulled slightly, but this I'd imagine would have been quite an eye-catching piece, which would have sparked conversation. And again, I'm assuming it was to be worn out, not necessarily something that was put away, locked away. So it is quite a conversational piece, perhaps. People might have worn it. Whose hair is that, and how did it come to be? So there's that whole perhaps social standing and the way this object would have functioned. I'm so curious of how it would have functioned in society at the time.
Right, like, who are you wearing?
Yeah. Yes.
We hadn't really discussed this, but something I just thought about if we want to go into it. Are there any ways that both of you kind of gather things to be remembered and to pass on that feel like culturally or personally relevant?
No, I mean, we spoke before from my perspective, like culturally with, so for example, with hair, certainly with locks, it would definitely not be a thing to be taken and hanging onto someone's locks. Quite, the thing around spirituality and the sacredness of it. I think there's been a shift. This is like my personal view in terms of culturally associations with hair. And that maybe that changed with maybe the fashions in the 1960s with the wearing of wigs. But there certainly was a thing where you wouldn't put someone else's hair necessarily. I'm talking like perhaps from my background of Jamaican, Caribbean heritage, that wouldn't be a thing. You wouldn't be putting someone else's hair on your head. You know, you don't know the history of that. And that's a big shift now, because certainly hair has become, for Black hair in particular, you know, this billion-dollar global industry. And we spoke about this quite interesting having this conversation because of where the hair comes from, what's desirable hair, the texture. You know, there was this thing about hair coming from Asia and parts of Latin America, and it's all this, you know, this how straight it would be and how light it would be, and the desire now for human hair. You know, it's not about it being synthetic. It needs to be real hair, and the value on that. And so it just brings up so much for me, like seeing this. That I do. So from my perspective personally, I've done work around hair in terms of, I made a documentary in the past where I was many years ago, and it's just something that's not gone out of fashion. It's still very topical, still generates debates, conversations, news feeds, you know, this thing around hair and Black hair and what it means, particularly to Black women. And as I said, how it's portrayed to this day in the media.
That makes a lot of sense. I remember you saying that, like, there's definitely, it sounds like there was a massive shift between, you know, never holding on to someone else's locks, to, sorry, I'm just going to repeat that because I heard like some noise. Yeah, it sounds like there was a massive cultural shift because of, like, you know, going from one extreme, which is like, you know, you don't want to hold on to someone else's hair. It sounds like this deeply spiritual, emotional thing. And when I think about what it means to possess something or possess someone, that could maybe have a very negative attribution to it. Versus now, like with beauty standards and capitalism and the things being sold, especially disproportionately targeted towards Black women, and like saying like these are what acceptable bodies look like.
Yeah, and not really wanting to know the history of where the journey of that hair, where has it really, you know, why was it cut in the first place? Where has it come from? It's more about the here and now, and this just, the fashion. There's some really extreme long hair as well. You know, it's just to say it's the currency, and it does feed into what you were saying earlier, Hansika, about, you know, the colonial expectations and beauty standards as well. And it's very alive today, I feel, that what is desirable hair, you know, and it is, as I say, maybe perhaps the closer it is to European straightened hair, the more desirable. Who knows? But it's ongoing, this debate, and that, you know, that against human, you know, personal choice and freedom of expression. That's the other side, isn't it? It's like, actually, no, I want to express myself in this way. That's so.
Yeah, I think it's like, I kind of see that happening, you know, even with a lot of Asian women who don't have like straight hair, who have curly hair. They are like much more likely to wake up earlier every morning than everybody else, so that they can spend 3-4 hours like straightening their hair. Again, it is just like this Eurocentric idea of beauty that everyone's just so conditioned to aspire to, that they feel like they need to constantly straighten their hair.
Yeah, like it's definitely a very different level of like body policing that, like, you know, I experience as a South Indian woman, like compared to like what Black women go through on the very like daily basis. But from the age of like 12 to 18, I straightened my hair like every single day. And it's not even that curly, honestly. It's just not straight, and it's not what most of my peers' hair looked like. And then the other Asian girls in my class were also straightening their hair, so that was the norm. So it warps your perception of like what is normal and what is desirable, if that's even something to be making decisions off of. Because desirable for who? Like,
yeah, definitely. I mean, I did the same thing when I was a teenager. I went to school with mainly Asian people, and everyone had really, you know, sleek, straight hair, and I had really like wavy, curly hair, and so I used to like iron it a lot. Again, just because I wanted to fit in, but like fit into what this idea of beauty that we've all just been permission to believe is the only way to be.
On that note, the next museum object is not a museum.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a piece of art by Linett. It's called Stand Up, Stand Out, and Stand Firm. And I'm going to let you say more about it and why that was brought to this project.
This whole topic of hair for myself personally, as a Black woman, as a Black person, it is hugely charged with racism, policing of hair, not just in the past, in terms of being made to cover the hair, not being able to tend and nourish and decorate and do all the things that many Black people would have done who were taken, into slavery. That was a huge thing as well. And then it's almost through the diaspora. This, it touches upon so many things. It's so charged with a lot of emotion. It's political, and it's just ongoing. It never ends. So for me, there's a lot of that, and I wanted to say that context because even today, this recording is 2021. Pretty much most high-profile Black women will not be wearing their hair in its so-called natural state, because even that is like a statement, So to see it's still a thing, and then it touches upon things of personal choice, fashion. It's very complex, and as you said at the start, it's not about one version, but there is definitely a predominant version of hair and the type of texture of hair. So I think it's really interesting. And so this piece that I did, the context of that is that I've been involved in education for quite a long time. So I describe myself as an artist and an educator. And I'd been, running schools, I'd set up schools, done all these things. And so people got to know me in the community and what I did. So when my phone rang and I was asked for advice and to support this family who it hadn't broken in the mainstream news yet, but there was a particular young man who had literally been pulled out of a classroom in a London school. I think this was around about 2017, and he had dreadlocks, and he was a Rastafarian. So his mother and himself, that was their belief, their religion, their faith. And this was a faith-based school. It was a brand new school that had put out there that they welcome all children of all backgrounds. And so that's how you would even be able to set up a school in the first place. And yet here we were with this young boy being taken out of the classroom because of his hair and being told he had to cut it off by Monday. He was taken out on the Friday because it went against the school rules. And I was so outraged and shocked. So I supported and guided as part of a wider team. I actually went and protested as well. First time I've been on the protest, but I was so angered by this discrimination, this blatant abuse of this young boy's human rights, his well-being. And I thought, here we are again, Black children, Black people being policed by their hair, being told how they should have their hair. And it also made me think about, the fantastic campaign by the South African Pretoria High School girls. That went global. They also were told you couldn't have your hair naturally. So to me, I had to take that somewhere and then painting this piece. And the reason why it's entitled that, the head teacher at the time had written a blog and was actually kind of boasting and bragging about holding and standing up for what he felt were the school's rules. This is the school uniform rules. This was the policy. And in fact, I was just gobsmacked that someone in such a high profile leadership position was so unaware of their own, that they had the power, the authority to disregard people's faith and religion. He was like, this isn't a religion. And so that was a way for me through my art. One, I thought it was important to document this event, and I did it through the art, but I also wanted to celebrate this moment where a parent, and because there's been many actually, she was one of the few that stood up and was public about it and fought. And they won the case in terms of the school. They came to an agreement but the school had to accept that that was wrong, what they did. The school changed their school uniform policies while they changed that during the time. So for me, it was a way of, as I say, capturing what had happened, letting that story be told. Because again, going back to these objects, you know, for me, maybe that was a kind of visual way of doing, so that in time when people look back, they might remember, you know of this story that was going on in a country where, for you know, Black people, we're not the majority, but there's not many of us. However, our human rights are just as valid as well. So that was it for me, you know, to make that statement through this piece. And it has since been used in an educational way as well. You know, there's people who are campaigning about equality, about Afro hair, African Caribbean hair, and hair just being worn, you know, as I said, in its natural state. It's not about having to straighten or cut your hair to fit a certain norm, particularly in this case where actually this was a religious, you know, reason for him having his hair. It wasn't a fashion statement.
Of course. Thank you for bringing this piece to our discussion today. From what you're saying, like in so many ways, it also it serves a similar function of like acting like a piece of self-preservation and like a way of documenting history and the way it's still unfolding, like an act of being a historian to hair and the bodies being policed for it. And like I think about how it's such a violently pervasive thing to tell someone they have to change their body, especially if it's like, you know, you have that hair for like a faith-based reason in order to be in a space and to be seen as acceptable, to share space and like to access education. This is such a fundamental thing too. It's an extension of so many other human rights violations. Like, this is amen.
And then there's the whole thing with dreadlocks as well, with the locks and, you know, the way that Rastafarism, you know, that came, the birth from Jamaica and the way that's been, you know, gone around the world through music and just again people's expectations, assumptions of who wears locks. I used to myself have long dreadlocks, and so I've personally experienced through my travels around the world. It's been absolutely fascinating seeing the different reactions where people would literally come up and just touch my hair, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But this whole thing about permission to touch as well, and you know, invading personal space, shall we say, and the way, as I say, it's frowned upon as well, and assumptions about whether hair that's dreadlocks is clean and acceptable. There's so many intersections with it. It's really interesting.
Right, and like those perceptions, and again, just projections and stereotypes about like cleanliness. What does it mean? Like those come from such Eurocentric and such colonial views of the body. And then that's replicated in such casual conversation, and like to reach out and touch someone that's without permission, especially like I know that's an ongoing thing. I feel like that's something that hopefully people are becoming more aware of, but I think especially in terms of like Black women's hair, like it's art. There's so much history and so much emotion behind what so many people already face. That's one way, that lack of respect for autonomy and entitlement for another's body. Like that's one of many ways I'm sure it shows up. Like, yeah. And I'm glad this piece is continuing to breathe life, as, you know, from an educational standpoint. So we are nearing the end of this discussion, and we're going to close with a poem that Hansika wrote about body hair. And, you know, we actually had a bit of a back and forth wondering, like, do we include this? Do we not? Because like, we're not really talking about body hair in this video, but as Hansika put earlier, it talks so much more about like societal perceptions and the worth that is attached to bodies based on hair. So I personally felt like it was very connected, and I would like to end this video on a very open note. I think this is just the start of one of many conversations. A lot of topics were brought up, and I'm very thankful for that. And I want to say thank you again to both of you for being here. And yeah, Hansika, if you want to close us out with your poem, I'd be honored to hear it again.
Thank you. So this poem is called Ode to My Body Hair. I wrote it maybe 4 or 5 months ago. Just to give some context, it is my personal, experience with body hair, and kind of letting go of this societal expectation of what hair on our body should look like, and the way that it should be tended. So yeah, I'm just gonna go straight into the poem, I think, because let it speak for itself. Ode to my body hair. You grow like a Areca palm, my body the seed. Glorious gardens grow on my skin. My body is a wonderland. You are lush black tulips sprouting, prickly grass on a sunny morning. I used to pluck all of your weeds. I wasn't taught to water you, but to split your stem from your roots. My toes dressed with your desire to grow. I wished you away after Papa said, "Eeks, no one will marry you if you have hair on your feet." Yet you stayed, growing into pockets of mini forests all over me. I basked in your loyalty. You showered me with nothing less. As I shed internalized inhibitions, you faithfully bloomed new flowers, bearing sweet tangerines in your buds, burgeoning golden leaves. You flourished. I owe my kingdom of gardens to you. My body is a wonderland, and you are the tallest treetop where I sprawl in awe.
That line, something about the tallest treetop. I love that as like a self-affirmation as well. As a very short tree myself, but
thank you, and it's been really for providing this space, and for us also to be given the opportunity. I really enjoyed and was enlightened to see these artifacts from the past, which I wasn't aware of were in existence, and just the thoughts that it's given me for what we're doing now, and how do we preserve and share for future generations what we're doing and our stories and context as well. So thank you for both of you.
Yeah, no, it was really, really interesting to kind of decipher hair, because we don't, talk about hair on a daily basis, even though we all have hair, and have different experiences with hair. And so I think it was really interesting to sort of, actually sit down and decipher it together. And like Linett said, look back at the past as well. So yeah, thank you, Anju, for the opportunity.
Okay, so thank you again so much for bringing yourselves, your personal experiences, your socio-cultural critiques, the discourse, your art. It was such a pleasure to just have you both here and to bring all that. I'm really excited that we got to share this conversation, and I know this isn't the last one we'll be having. And thank you for those of you at home who watched us and joined us and hopefully had some thoughts and critiques and experiences come up for yourselves. Again, it's part of this larger ongoing community conversation, so much more to come. And